Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Soviet Empire selected. Mission loaded.
We economic hitmen have managed to create the world's first truly global empire, and it's basically a secret empire. We do it many ways, but principally we identify a country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil, arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sisters. The money never actually goes to the country, it goes to our own corporations to build big infrastructure projects in that country that help a few very wealthy people, but don't benefit the majority of the people who are too poor to buy electricity or have cars to drive on the highways, and yet they're left holding a huge debt that they can't repay. So we go back at some point and say, you know, you can't pay your debts. Give us a pound of flesh, sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies, vote with us on the next critical UN vote, allow us to build a military base in your backyard, something along these lines. And when we fail, the jackals go in and either overthrow or assassinate these leaders. And if the jackals fail, as they did in Iraq, then we send in the military.
So, the official narrative of the mainstream media in the West is that Russia is challenging NATO and the international rules-based order by invading Ukraine. This narrative seizes on Russia's 2014 annexation of Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula as a starting point for United States-Russian relations, and as evidence of Putin's goals of rebuilding Russia's long-lost empire.
Ukraine's independence came in 1991. The Soviet Union had collapsed, and as it splintered, a number of new nations emerged. Ukraine was one of the largest. Its population was 52 million. It was 1,200 kilometers from east to west, and with that land came a huge farming sector, worth over $20 billion now, or close to £15 billion. And as democracy moved east, this was a moment of optimism. In 1991, Ukrainians celebrated their first election. The US called it momentous. One voter described a flowering of our soul. But for all the enthusiasm, democracy couldn't change Ukraine's geography or its history. To the east was Russia. To the west was Poland, Slovakia and Hungary. All three had communist past. By 2004, all three had joined the European Union. Being pro-Russia or pro-Europe became a fundamental dividing line in Ukrainian politics. And months later, we saw how. Amidst allegations of electoral fraud, what became known as the Orange Revolution began. And two men were the focus. Viktor Yanukovych, who was pro-Russia and who'd initially been declared the winner, and Viktor Yushchenko, here on the right, who was pro-Europe and would become president after a new vote. And while the outcome of that election was settled, relations with Russia were not. In 2010, there was a further twist. Yanukovych was re-elected, and then in 2013, he would take a decision with huge ramifications. Chris Morris reported at the time.
As EU leaders arrived for the Eastern Partnership Summit, something was missing. The centrepiece was supposed to have been the signing of an association agreement with Ukraine.
But it didn't happen. Under pressure from Russia, Yanukovych walked away from that deal with the EU, and another revolution would begin.
The Washington Post recently asked, why is there tension between Russia and Ukraine? Here is its answer. In March 2014, Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine. A month later, war erupted between Russian allied separatists and Ukraine's military in the eastern Ukrainian region of Donbass. The United Nations Human Rights Office estimates that more than 13,000 people have been killed. But that account is highly misleading, because in nearly every case reported by the mainstream media, they have omitted the United States' extensive role in the 2014 coup that preceded Russia's annexation of Crimea. Focusing on just the latter part, the annexation of Crimea, only serves to manufacture consent for United States intervention abroad, and for tougher sanctions on Russia. The backdrop to the 2014 coup and annexation cannot be understood without looking at the United States' strategy to open Ukrainian markets to foreign investors and give control of its economy to giant multinational corporations. A key tool for this has been the International Monetary Fund, which leverages aid loans to push governments to adopt policies friendly to foreign investors. The IMF is funded by and represents Western financial capital and governments, and has been at the forefront of efforts to reshape economies around the world for decades, often with disastrous results. The civil war in Yemen and the coup in Bolivia both followed a rejection of IMF terms. In Ukraine, the IMF had long planned to implement a series of economic reforms to make the country more attractive to investors. In 2013, after early steps to integrate with the West, Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych turned against these changes and ended trade integration talks with the European Union. Months before his overthrow, he restarted economic negotiations with Russia, in a major snub to the Western economic sphere. By then, the nationalist protests were heating up that would go on to topple his government. During this tug-of-war between the deep state and Russia, The Americans were engaged in a destabilization campaign against the Yanukovych government. After the 2014 coup, the new government quickly restarted the EU deal. The campaign culminated with the overthrow of the elected president in the Maidan Revolution, also known as the Maidan coup or the Maidan Massacre, named for the Kiev square that hosted the bulk of the protests.
И первые выступления массовые начались 21 числа, 21 ноября. Сначала акции проходили мирно. На эти акции пришли люди разной категории. Это были молодые и пожилые люди, приходили с детьми. Явно было понятно, что с их стороны есть доверие к власти, в том числе и к правоохранителям, потому что свободно выходили. И никаких намеков на то, что будет в отношении этих манифестантов приниматься какие-то меры воздействия, силовые и так далее, просто не существовало. Значит, соответственно, на охрану общественного порядка выходили правоохранители без огнестрельного оружия. Но среди митингующих уже замечены нами радикалы, которые относились к правым партиям, неофашистским организациям. И 24 числа, 24 ноября, они осуществили первую агрессивную акцию. 24 числа первое было нападение на кабинет министров и первое нападение на сотрудников правоохранителей, которые охраняли. Второе нападение на правоохранителей службы безопасности Украины произошло 25 числа. Затем небезызвестные события 30 числа.
November 30th of 2013 became the first turning point of Euromaidan, and one of its most reported and mysterious events.
Я тогда немножко расскажу, как видел эти события я. Был звонок мне от Попова, глава администрации города Киева. Он говорил, что давайте сегодня мы хотели бы завозить оборудование для новогодней елки на площадь. Я ему объяснил, что до тех пор, пока люди находятся на площади, этого делать нельзя. В районе часа ночи, когда массовые люди начали расходиться, разъезжаться, я поговорил по телефону с руководителем службы безопасности Украины и спросил его точку зрения по развитию событий. Он сказал, я считаю, что, слава богу, все закончилось. Вся информация идет о том, что все закончилось. Потому что фактически с 21 числа, я в кабинете просто жил и спал там какое-то время, может быть, 2 часа в сутки удавалось поспать. Около 3 часов ночи я приехал тоже к себе домой. Завел часы на 6:30 утра, включил телевизор сразу же, когда проснулся. Он у меня был настроен на 5-й канал. И 5-й канал демонстрирует большое количество скорой помощи. И там побитые люди.
After riot, police attacked peaceful protesters with clubs.
Happened in the early morning hours. The eyewitnesses that were there said that the police did use truncheons.
Меня, честно говоря, пробил просто холодный пот.
Моя первая реакция на то, что Майдан пострадал от действий полиции, была мгновенной. Нужно было расследовать, кто дал приказ разгонять митингующих, применять к ним силу. Я был противник того, чтобы к митингующим применялась сила, нарушали права людей.
Решений таких Попов самостоятельно принимать просто не мог. А кто для него был самый высокий руководитель? Для Попова был самый большой руководитель, это глава администрации. Сергей Владимирович Левочкин.
Coincidentally, Sergei Lovochkin is a close associate to many U.S. politicians. The security service of Ukraine had evidence that on that night, Lovochkin was in contact with opposition leader Yatsenyuk, where they discussed the clearing of Maidan on the pretext of installing the annual Christmas tree. News media reported that the riot police cruelly attacked the students peacefully sleeping in their tents. But scenes from the event seem to tell a different story. It appears that the protesters were waiting for the police. Additionally, there were dozens of journalists and cameramen from all the new public TV news outlets prepared to cover the events. And most ominously, a group of well-trained young men arrived to Maidan almost simultaneously with the riot police. They infiltrated the crowd and began provocations with insults, stones, and torches.
As political turmoil engulfed the country in the lead up to 2014, the United States was fueling anti-government sentiment through mechanisms like USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy, NED, just as they had done in 2004's Color Revolution. In December 2013, Nuland, Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs and a long-time regime change advocate, said that the United States government had spent $5 billion promoting democracy in Ukraine since 1991. The money went towards supporting senior officials in the Ukraine government, members of the business community as well as opposition civil society, who agree with United States goals.
The world is watching the drama that is unfolding in the center of Kyiv. The Euromaidan movement has come to embody the principles and values that are the cornerstones for all free democracies. What began on November 24th as a protest against President Yanukovych's decision to pause on the route to Europe has become much deeper and bigger. After blood was spilled by security forces on November 30th, the movement also became about justice and civil rights. Later that same day, I spent more than 2 hours with President Yanukovych. It was a tough conversation, but also a realistic one. But I also made clear that the United States believes there is a way out for Ukraine, that it is still possible to save Ukraine's European future, and that that is where we wanted to see the President lead his country. And that was going to require immediate steps to de-escalate the security situation and immediate political steps to end the crisis and get Ukraine back into a conversation with Europe and with the International Monetary Fund. The reforms that the IMF insists on are necessary for the long-term economic health of the country. A new deal with the IMF would also send a positive signal to private markets and would increase foreign direct investment that is so urgently needed in Ukraine. Signing the association agreement with the EU would also put Ukraine on a path to strengthening the sort of stable and predictable business environment that investors require. There is no other path that would bring Ukraine back to long-term political stability and economic growth. As Vice President Biden said in remarks last night, President Yanukovych has a choice. He can choose the path that leads to division and isolation, or he can take a leap and take immediate, tangible steps to defuse his country's crisis and start a genuine dialogue with the opposition and agree on a path that returns Ukraine to economic and political health. Since Ukraine's independence in 1991, the United States has supported Ukrainians as they build democratic skills and institutions, as they promote civic participation and good governance, all of which are preconditions for Ukraine to achieve its European aspirations. We've invested over $5 billion to assist Ukraine in these and other goals that will ensure a secure and prosperous and democratic Ukraine.
The NED is a key organization in the network of American soft power that pours $170 million a year into organizations dedicated to defending or installing United States-friendly regimes. The Washington Post's David Ignatius once wrote that the organization functions by doing in public what the CIA used to do in private. The NED targets governments who oppose the United States military or economic policy, stirring up anti-government opposition. One of the many recipients of NED money for projects in Ukraine was the International Republican Institute. The IRI, once chaired by Senator John no-name McCain, has long had a hand in United States regime change operations. We see here that the IRI also worked their magic in Haiti. During the protests that eventually brought down the government, McCain and other United States officials personally flew into Ukraine to encourage protesters. On February 6, 2014, as the anti-government protests were intensifying, an anonymous party assumed by many to be Russia leaked a call between Assistant Secretary of State Nuland and United States Ambassador to Ukraine Jeffrey Pyatt.
In early February of 2014, as the Maidan crisis was getting more violent, there was a phone call that was intercepted. It was a call between the Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, Victoria Nuland, and the U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Pyatt.
Questions of credibility are being raised after a private chat between two top U.S. diplomats was leaked online.
I think Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, you know, what he needs is Klitsch and Tony Book on the outside. I just think Klitsch going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Okay. Good. Well, do you want us to try to set up a call with him as the next step?
Sullivan's come back to me, VFR, saying you need Biden, and I said probably tomorrow for an attaboy and to get the deets to stick. So okay. Biden's willing.
So you had this remarkable phone call where you have these two senior officials of the U.S. government apparently talking about a coup or how they were planning to restructure the government of Ukraine.
The two officials discussed which opposition officials would staff a prospective new government, agreeing that Yatsenyuk should be in charge. The Washington Post acknowledged that the call showed a deep degree of United States involvement in affairs that Washington only says are Ukraine's to resolve. But that fact rarely factored into the future coverage of the United States, Ukraine and Russia relationship. It was also agreed that someone high profile be brought in to push things along. That someone was...
But I look to Dr. Sherwood. Are we moving...
Joe Biden, wake up. Joe Biden, wake up. 9/11.
One of the things that I strongly believe is
Joe Biden, wake up.
I should probably go home. I'm tired.
Joe Biden, wake up.
Joe. I'm tired.
Joe Biden.
What's happening?
Joe Biden.
What's happening? Joe. Hello, Mr. President, wake up.
You should have to pay nearly $6,400 more than you would today.
Протестующих и силовиков на Майдане 3 года назад расстреливали наемные грузинские снайперы. Доказательства этого сегодня были представлены в Киевском суде. О признаниях людей, которые получили деньги за массовое убийство, заявил адвокат бывшего президента Януковича. Среди материалов и видеозапись бойни. Наемники даже согласились дать официальные показания. Подробности у Александра Балицкого.
Вы готовы давать показания в суде по видеоконференции?
Скайпом, да?
Скайпом, да. Готовы.
Подписывая показания прямо перед камерой, они говорят, что готовы подтвердить все и украинскому суду. Единственное условие по видеосвязи из Армении, куда они уехали, опасаясь за жизнь. Граждане Грузии Александр Ривазишвили, Кубанергадзе, они принимали непосредственное участие в протестах на Майдане, обещают назвать имена тех, кто 4 года назад отдавал команду стрелять.
Действуйте как можно агрессивнее. У нас задача была делать провокации, всячески Беркут выводить из себя.
Неважно было, куда стрелять. В дерево или в баррикады, или в тех, кто бросал коктейли Молотова. Самое важное было стрелять, создавая...
Weeks later, on February 22nd, after a massacre by suspicious snipers brought tensions to a head, the Ukrainian parliament quickly removed Yanukovych from office in a constitutionally questionable maneuver. Yanukovych then fled the country, calling the overthrow a coup.
И на следующий день господин Янукович уехал во второй по величине город страны, в город Харьков. Как только он уехал, захватили и его резиденцию, администрации, и правительство с помощью оружия. Как это называется?
Дело в том, что я вылетел туда вертолетом. Машины, которые меня должны были сопровождать, выехали самостоятельно, но этого никто не знал. Ехали президентские машины, и по этой колонне президентских машин был открыт огонь. Также была информация у нашей разведки, что были специальные наемники, которым была поставлена задача не захватывать президента, а расстрелять. И я обратился к президенту Путину, чтобы он разрешил мне выехать на территорию России. Я получил согласие, и мне было оказано содействие. 24 февраля я попал на территорию России.
On February 27th, Yatsenuk became the prime minister.
Я хочу вам сказать, вы затронули...
The Washington-backed opposition that toppled the government was fueled by far-right and openly Nazi elements like the Right Sector.
The most prominent among these extremist groups is an organization called Svoboda. The Svoboda Party, which traces its roots to the Ukrainian Partisan Party of World War II, was loosely allied with Nazi Germany. Until 2004, Svoboda had been called the Social Nationalist Party, a deliberate reference to the National Socialism of the Nazis. And we're not throwing the term neo-Nazi around here as an empty slur. The leader of Svoboda, Oleg Tyanibok, has openly targeted Jews and ethnic Russians in Ukraine for many years. In 2004, he was kicked out of Viktor Yushchenko's government for a speech calling for Ukrainians to fight against a, quote, Muscovite Jewish mafia. And in 2005, he signed his name to an open letter to the leadership of Ukraine entitled, Stop the Criminal Activities of Organized Jewry. And none of this was a secret. The BBC was already reporting on the danger that Svoboda's rise posed back in 2012. And the EU passed a resolution that same year condemning Svoboda as, quote, racist, anti-Semitic, and xenophobic. Yet somehow the US government thought it was appropriate to back these extremists. This is a picture of Victoria Nuland from the US State Department meeting with Oleg Tyanibok in February. And this is a picture of Senator John McCain sharing a stage with Tyanibok in December. But why would the US government work with neo-Nazis? Because they thought that they could control the situation. They thought that they could install their puppets behind the scenes and manipulate the situation in their favor.
One far-right group that grew out of the protests was the Azov Battalion, a paramilitary militia of neo-Nazi extremists. Their leaders made up the vanguard of the anti-Yanukovych protests and even spoke at opposition events in the Maidan alongside regime change advocates like McCain and Nuland.
In place of the defiant speeches, the somber strains of Beethoven now ring out over Independence Square. This revolution is moving into a new phase. But amidst the flowers and the children's tributes, flashes of something more sinister. Groups of armed men strut through the square with dubious iconography. That yellow armband is a Volksangel, a German symbol used by several SS divisions during the Second World War. Far-right graffiti is appearing, daubed on the walls of the city.
The shooter is linked to a 74-page manifesto filled with white supremacist rhetoric.
FBI agents say he expressed a desire to travel to Ukraine to fight with a far-right paramilitary group.
At least one member of an American hate group also trained in Ukraine with Azov Battalion.
The symbols on their flags have been especially controversial. Azov says it combines the letters I and N for idea of nation, but extremism experts see it as an emblem of Nazism.
The official symbol of Azov, it's a version of Volksangel. It was one of the symbols of one of SS division during the World War II. It is one of more or less usual symbols for neo-Nazi groups all over the world.
And it's not just about their symbols. When it was founded in 2014, Azov drew many of its commanders and recruits from Ukraine's most notorious far-right groups, including outright neo-Nazis.
After the violent coup, these groups were later incorporated into the Ukrainian armed forces. The same armed forces that the United States has now given $2.5 billion to. And these forces have been responsible for a wide variety of atrocities in the counterinsurgency war. In a recent UN vote on combating glorification of Nazism, neo-Nazism and other practices that contribute to fueling contemporary forms of racism, the United States and Ukraine were the only two countries to vote no. Huh. From Russia's point of view, a long-time adversary had successfully overthrown a neighbouring government using violent far-right extremists. The Crimean Peninsula, which was part of Russia until it was transferred to the Ukrainian Soviet Republic in 1954, is home to one of two Russian naval bases with access to the Black and Mediterranean Seas, one of history's most important maritime theatres. A Crimea controlled by a US-backed Ukrainian government was a major threat to Russian naval access. In Crimea, 82% of the households speak Russian, and only 2% speak mainly Ukrainian. Well, they held a plebiscite on March 2014 on whether or not they should join Russia or remain under the new Ukrainian government. The pro-Russia camp won with 95% of the vote.
As many as 95.5% of the electorate in Crimea have voted to join Russia. That comes after 50% of votes have been counted.
The UN General Assembly, led by the United States, voted to ignore the referendum results on the grounds that it was contrary to Ukraine's constitution. This same constitution that had been set aside to oust President Yanukovych a month earlier. All of this has been left out of Western media's coverage. In addition to integrating Ukraine into the US-dominated economic sphere, the deep state cabal also want to integrate Ukraine militarily. For years, the United States has sought the expansion of NATO, an explicitly anti-Russian military alliance. NATO was originally billed as a counterforce to the Warsaw Pact during the Cold War, but after the demise of the Soviet Union, the United States promised the new Russia that it would not expand NATO east of Germany. Despite this agreement, the United States continued building out its military alliance, growing closer and closer to Russia's borders, and ignoring Russia's objections.
Почему мы так остро реагируем на расширение НАТО? Нас беспокоит практика принятия решений. Я знаю, как принимаются. Когда страна становится членом НАТО, ей уже очень трудно сопротивляться давлению со стороны такой крупной страны, лидера НАТО, как США. И там легко может появиться все, что угодно. Система противоракетной обороны, и новые базы, и, если потребуется, и новые ударные комплексы. А нам что делать? Мы должны в этой связи предпринимать контрмеры, то есть ставить под удар наших ракетных систем те объекты, которые, по нашему мнению, начинают нам угрожать. Ситуация напрягает.
If we are attacked, we would certainly respond.
Знаете, мне кажется, я не всегда понимаю логику наших партнеров. Иногда складывается впечатление, что нужно держать в повиновении.
Putin has been clear about a path to de-escalation. His main demand has been for direct negotiations to end the expansion of the hostile military alliance to his borders. He announced, "We have made it clear that NATO's move to the east is unacceptable, and that the United States is standing with missiles on our doorstep."
40 missiles. Longer range. IRBMs. They can hit every place in the country, except Seattle.
Mr. President, you give me the order right now. My planes will be ready to carry out the airstrikes in 3 days' time. All you gotta do is say go. My boys will get those red bastards.
Well, General, how long until the Army's ready?
We've just begun the mobilization under cover of a prearranged exercise, sir. We're looking at another week and a half.
But you can order the strikes now. Plans call for an 8-day air campaign. It'll light a fire under the Army's ass to get in place.
General LeMay, do you truly believe that's our best course of action?
Mr. President, I believe it is the only course of action. America is in danger. Those missiles are a threat to our bomber bases and the safety of our nuclear deterrent. Now, without our deterrent, there's nothing to keep the enemy from choosing general nuclear war. It's our duty, sir. Our responsibility to the American people to take out those missiles and return stability to the strategic situation. The big red dog is digging in our backyard, and we are justified in shooting him.
Sir, we have a rapidly closing window of opportunity.
Mr. President, the motto I chose for SAC is peace is our profession. Now, God forbid we find ourselves in a nuclear exchange, but if launched, those missiles from Cuba would kill a lot of Americans. The very presence of those missiles gives the Soviets first strike capability. Those missiles make a nuclear exchange more likely. And that is why I'm being such a pain in the ass about destroying them and destroying them immediately. Hell, even Mac agrees. And, sir, given your own statements about Cuba, I think a blockade or a bunch of political talk be considered by a lot of our friends and neutrals as a pretty weak response. I suspect that many of our own citizens might feel the same way. You're in a pretty bad fix, Mr. President.
What did you say?
you're in a pretty bad fix.
So maybe you haven't noticed you're in it with me.
Those goddamn Kennedys are gonna destroy this country if we don't do something about this.
Putin asked, how would the Americans react if missiles were placed at the border with Canada or Mexico? In corporate media coverage, no one bothers to ask this important question. Instead, the assumption is that Putin ought to tolerate a hostile military alliance directly across its border. In 2010, Ukraine elected Viktor Yanukovych as president. The US and the EU were not happy about these events as they saw the new president as far too aligned with Russia. Before the election of Yanukovych, Ukraine had a free trade deal with the EU. But in 2013, Yanukovych did a 180 and refused to sign the deal, favoring closer ties with Russia. In November 2013, led by Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, Victoria Nuland, the United States deep state formed a color revolution called Euromaidan, which led to a coup in Ukraine. Yanukovych was overthrown, and leaders in eastern Ukraine declared allegiance to Yanukovych. This led to anti-government protests in February of 2014 and a referendum in Crimea where 97% of the respondents voted to return Crimea to Russia.
Не будет к нам вмешиваться Европа и Америка, войны у нас не будет. Мы россиян встретим с хлебом с солью, понимаете? Какая может быть война? Они наши братья, мы их ждем. Ну не
Meanwhile, the new post-coup Ukrainian government proposed a bill to remove Russian as an official language. Russian speakers in East Ukraine were angered about this, saying that ethnic Russians were in imminent danger. In early 2014, Russia started sending support to Russians in the eastern regions of Ukraine, Donetsk, Zaporizhia and Odessa, who now demanded independence from this new Ukraine. In April 2014, the mainly Russian-speaking regions of Donetsk and Luhansk broke away from the Ukraine and proclaimed themselves as separate republics.
Создание суверенного государства Донецкая Народная Республика.
Training. Also in early 2014, Russia started performing military exercises on the eastern Ukrainian border, just as NATO was doing the same in Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, who share borders with Russia. In September of 2014, Ukraine and Russia signed a ceasefire agreement in Minsk, Belarus, to end hostilities in East Ukraine. Despite the Minsk agreements from 2014 to date, continuous battles have been waged between Ukrainian forces and Luhansk and Donetsk separatists over territory on the Donbas region, in violation of the agreements. Along with the armed conflict, the EU and the US imposed international sanctions against Russia. The sanctions led to the collapse of the Russian currency and caused economic damage to EU countries. By 2016, Russia had lost an estimated 600 billion. The price of Russian gas is very competitive, and the United States cannot compete with Russia in the European market, so a need arises to evict Russia from its status as the leading supplier.
New construction options.
Thus, Washington wants to kill Nord Stream 2 in its cradle. The pipeline has become a test of the EU's strategic autonomy. Washington thinks that the delay in clearing Nord Stream 2 will put pressure on Moscow to back off in Ukraine, since Russia stands to earn more than 15 billion annually out of the pipeline. Russia also invested around 11 billion in the pipeline's construction.
On hold.
And Moscow has warned that holding Nord Stream 2 hostage will be counterproductive. And it's doubtful that the Kremlin could be browbeaten to give up on its vital security concerns NATO expansion and so on, for the sake of salvaging the gas exports to Europe. Russia has huge currency reserves and can afford to take some financial losses. Besides, Russia is shortly signing the deal for the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline to China with a massive capacity. If push comes to shove, Russia will replace the European buyers with Asian customers such as Japan, South Korea and India.
Building in progress.
Moscow and Beijing are close to agreeing a second pipeline, the Power of Siberia 2, which would double gas exports from Russia to China. It would cross through Mongolia and into the power-hungry industrial regions near Beijing. It would also join up Russia's internal gas network, connecting China with the same gas fields in Russia's Yamal Peninsula that supply Europe.
It does give Gazprom, as that major exporter, the optionality to direct gas to one market over another.
That could give Russia considerable leverage.
Technically, it is hard to tell whether the pricing system will be designed in a way that there is going to be the possibility to sell to the highest bidder, but I think that Russia in its intent is definitely eyeing in this direction to be able to use it as a leverage, at least rhetorically, in the coming decade.
First objective met.
I think it's very sad when Germany makes a massive oil and gas deal with Russia, where you're supposed to be guarding against Russia, and Germany goes out and pays billions and billions of dollars a year to Russia. So we're protecting Germany, we're protecting France, we're protecting all of these countries, and then numerous of the countries go out and make a pipeline deal with Russia, where they're paying billions of dollars into the coffers of Russia. So we're supposed to protect you against Russia, but they're paying billions of dollars to Russia, and I think that's very inappropriate. And the former chancellor of Germany is the head of the pipeline company that's supplying the gas. Ultimately, Germany will have almost 70% of their country controlled by Russia with natural gas. So you tell me, is that appropriate? I mean, I've been complaining about this from the time I got in. It should have never been allowed to have happened. But Germany is totally controlled by Russia because they were getting from 60 to 70% of their energy from Russia and a new pipeline. And you tell me if that's appropriate, because I think it's not. And I think it's a very bad thing for NATO, and I don't think it should have happened. Now, if you look at it, Germany is a captive of Russia because they got rid of their coal plants, they got rid of their nuclear. They're getting so much of the oil and gas from Russia. I think it's something that NATO has to look at. I think it's very inappropriate. You and I agree that it's inappropriate.
The US and NATO created this crisis because they tossed aside the reasonable demands of the Russian Federation in 2 draft treaties submitted on December 21st, 2021. One of the key demands was for a neutral Ukraine and a binding pledge that it would never join NATO. For his part, Ukrainian President Zelensky dismissed the Minsk Protocols, which was the only formula to solve the impasse over the breakaway republics in Donetsk and Luhansk. The Minsk Protocols required the Ukrainian government to negotiate with the breakaway region concerning the restoration of its previous autonomy, as well as language and cultural rights prior to the Maidan coup in 2014. These failures left the Russian-speaking people of the Donbass alone to suffer the increasing military onslaught of the Ukrainian government, riddled with neo-Nazi parties and egged on by Western arms and money. All of these reasons and 3 decades of betrayal by the United States and NATO of their pledges in the early 1990s to Gorbachev, the last Soviet president, that NATO wouldn't expand 1 inch eastward of a reunited Germany is why we see these moves from Russia today. However, in the past 30 years, rather than dissolving itself because it was set up to protect North Atlantic countries from the alleged danger of communism, NATO expanded 800 kilometers to the east and admitted 14 states which had been broke away from the former Soviet Union or were former members of the Warsaw Pact. Western military and naval forces were stationed in these new NATO member countries, and NATO installed missile systems and held massive drills close to Russia's diminished borders.
Soviet Empire has fallen.
Clearly, the United States' plan was for its aggressive military alliance, NATO, to expand right up to all of Russia's border, with a view to further dismembering Russia and consolidating United States hegemony over the entire European continent. Russia, in its desire to protect the people of the Donbass region, decided quite reasonably to recognize their governments and to create a demilitarized zone in the rest of Ukraine. Russia says it has no intention of controlling Ukraine, and its military operation is only to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine in an action taken after 30 years of the United States pushing Russia too far.
Since 1991, there have been multiple waves of NATO expansion. The first one was in 1999. Hungary, Poland and the Czech Republic joined the NATO. All three were members of the Warsaw Pact. Now they're all NATO allies. The second wave came in 2004. Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia and Slovenia, all of them joined NATO. Then came the controversial Bucharest summit in 2008. NATO turned its focus on the Western Balkans. Albania and Croatia joined in 2009, Montenegro in 2017, North Macedonia in 2020. 3 countries are considered aspiring members: Bosnia and Herzegovina, Ukraine and Georgia. Now, if you look at this map now, it has changed completely. Before 1991, NATO was confined to Western Europe. Today, it is at Russia's gates. Vladimir Putin is not the only leader to have condemned this expansion. It was criticized by Gorbachev and Boris Yeltsin too. The difference is, Putin is drawing a red line, and that red line for him is Ukraine.
Russian President Vladimir Putin said in a TV address that the goal of Russia's military operation was not to take control of Ukraine, but to demilitarize it and denazify the country. Moments after he spoke, explosions were heard in several Ukrainian cities. The Russian Defense Ministry said these were precision attacks against Ukrainian military installations and that civilians were not being targeted. It also said Ukraine's air force on the ground and its air defenses had been destroyed.
Second objective met.
The campaign in Ukraine began after the Donbass republics were officially recognized by Russia. We see here the signing ceremony with President Putin on February the 21st.
Third objective met.
After 8 years of war, or rather 8 years of the Donbass republics being under attack by Ukraine, both the republics swiftly appealed to President Putin for military assistance to end the conflict. President Putin announced Russia's military action.
Донбасса обратились к России с просьбой о помощи. В связи с этим, в соответствии со статьей 51 части 7 Устава ООН, санкции Совета Федерации России и во исполнение ратифицированных Федеральным собранием 22 февраля сего года договоров о дружбе и взаимопомощи с Донецкой Народной Республикой и Луганской Народной Республикой, мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции. Ее цель – защита людей, которые на протяжении 8 лет подвергаются издевательствам, геноциду со стороны киевского режима. И для этого мы будем стремиться к демилитаризации и денацификации Украины, а также преданию суду тех, кто совершил многочисленные кровавые преступления против мирных жителей, в том числе и граждан Российской Федерации. При этом в наши планы не входит оккупация украинских территорий. Мы никому и ничего не собираемся навязывать силой.
Mission timer initialized.
Dear comrades, I want to say that the special military operation is going strictly in accordance with schedule, according to the plan. All the goals are being successfully achieved.
Have a look at this 3-year delta from the Q drops, which demonstrates that we are on schedule and Putin is clearly involved. In his national address, Putin spoke of the US-inspired coup in Kiev of 2014, whose junta thought it could impose its will on the Russian-speaking minority in the Donbass. At one point he directly threatened the extreme nationalists who seized power in the 2014 coup and let loose a wave of violence and systematic persecution against ethnic Russians. Putin said, "The criminals who committed that atrocity have never been punished, and no one is even looking for them. But we know their names, and we will do everything to punish them, find them and bring them to justice." This, I believe, is what we are witnessing now. Nazis getting put the fuck down.
Saying it, but it's another thing doing it. If you feel it, good shot there from Anthony Joshua, and Vladimir Klitschko took it, but Joshua's going for a big left hand, and down goes the giant Ukrainian in the same round that he lost his unbeaten record to Ross Purity, and can he get through it? A minute and a half left in the 11th, and Klitschko down for the second time in the fight, and this is Anthony Joshua's big chance of Hughes' right hand, and Klitschko is somehow trying to survive, but Anthony Joshua topples him again. Unbelievable! Scenes at Wembley. Klitschko just gets through.
Не катится, но близок одинок, там и злой медведь, там и лютый волк.
Ты страшный не медведь, не волк, медведь мой дядько, волк мой браток.
Да на тебя ходят дети, горько будут плакать и дети.
Душа на не льет горьких слез, Боже поможет детям без потерь.
Река ревать, слезы проливать, на небе тучи воронья.
Горе не горюй, и не плачь, мать, чему быть, того не миновать.
Стволов за поясом,
со мной 100 братов, колоску, колосок.
Стволов за поясом,
над головой огненное колесо.
Стволов за поясом,
смерть косит косой, колоски вяжет срок.
Стволов за поясом, свою кровь белой росой.
Тут на самой окраине верится как в правду то, что рая нет. И я не знаю, как надо и как правильней. Умоляю сердце, не чувствуй, стань каменным. Эй, в огне хата, в огне храм. Люди спят и слышен храп. Братцы-разбойники, стволок за поясок и про запас расходники. Будет рамс, значит будет бойня. Ведь больно душа, знаю только война. Слишком рано стала тобой, мать. Война приходит, брат, чтоб свое брать. Чему быть, того не миновать. Палачу меня казнить, Богу миловать. На окна ставни, двери на засов. На 40 сороков срок пришел, ствол за поясок.
Стволов за поясом,
со мной 100 братов, колоску, колосок.
Стволов за поясом,
над головой огненное колесо.
Стволов за поясом,
смерть косит косой, колоски даже срок.
Стволов за поясом, свою кровь белой росой.
Вечность путь зовет сынов, и это вечный зов. Их жизни тают, словно свечи у образов. Вчера во сне я видел смерть и лес крестов. Сегодня стало понятно, что это был вещий сон. шашка свистнет, голова с плеч, притекла, притечет впредь, блять, будет сечь. Блять, стволок, будет петь стволок, будут хором петь 100 сполох, песню как за столом. Под капотом табун с какуном, вороных табун прошел за ним, пыль столбом, да земля горит. Стали братья как один за одного, полный рост, смерть взялась за косу, начался лютый покос. Колоску, колосок, в чистом поле в окружении черных лесов. Батя с братьями уснули тут вечным сном, из-за них пришли отомстить 100 сынов. Со мной 100 братов, колоску, колосок. Над головой объедая колесо. Смерть косит косой, колоски даже вдох.
Discuss the ongoing special operation in Ukraine. Main clashes between the Russian army and the Ukraine forces are not actually clashes with the Ukrainian army, but with the illegal groups of nationalists that are actually responsible for the blood that we see in Ukraine. These nationalists that became embedded in Ukrainian armed forces actually keep encouraging the Ukrainian army to attack and also serve as human shields. Also, we can see and observe that neo-Nazi forces and these nationalists provide heavy weapons to the central parts of cities, including Kiev and Kharkov. They expect to draw return fire by Russian armed forces against civilian population areas, civilians populated areas. They try to do this to then blame Russia for attacking civilians. We know clearly that this is done under the recommendation of American consultants and experts, primarily Americans. I would like once again to address the Ukrainian army men. Do not let these nationalists use you, use your women, your children, your elderly, to use them as human shields. It will be so much easier to talk to you and to negotiate with you than with this gang of Nazis that has captured Kiev.
In history, where the world has a unique and short window of opportunity to move from an age of confrontation to an age of cooperation, constructive and honest dialogue to address our common challenges is better than isolation and polarization.
Globalization resulted in a substantial increase in the profits of the large multinational companies, primarily American and European ones. Who gets these revenues? Talking about companies. The answer is obvious. Those who represent 1% of the population. And what has happened with the other people? I would point out one more important aspect: modern technology, modern technological. First of all, digital giants have been playing an increasingly significant role in the life of the society by encroaching on or restricting the natural right of people to decide for themselves how to live and what to choose and what view to express freely. On the other hand, we have seen all of this just recently in the United States. And everybody understands quite well what I'm talking about. And I'm sure that the majority of people share this view, including those who are participating today at this meeting. The world cannot follow the path of building an economy that works for 1 million people or even for the golden billion. It is clear that an era associated with attempts to build a centralized, unipolar world order is over. It hasn't been started even. There were attempts to do this, and just that, but it's over. Such a monopoly was inherently contrary to the cultural and historical diversity of our civilization.
Yesterday, reporters asked me if I thought President Putin was smart. I said, of course he's smart, to which I was greeted with, oh, that's such a terrible thing to say. I'd like to tell the truth. Yes, he's smart. The NATO nations, and indeed the world, as he looks over what's happening strategically with no repercussions or threats whatsoever, they're not so smart. They're looking the opposite of smart. If you take over Ukraine, we're going to sanction you, they say. Sanction? Well, that's a pretty weak statement. Putin is saying, oh, they're going to sanction me. They sanctioned me for the last 25 years. You mean I can take over a whole country and they're going to sanction me? You mean they're not going to blow us to pieces, at least psychologically? The problem is not that Putin is smart, which of course he's smart, but the real problem is that our leaders are dumb. Dumb. So dumb. Assault on humanity, that's what it is. This is an assault on humanity, so sad. Putin is playing Biden like a drum, and it's not a pretty thing as somebody that loves our country to watch. Just not a pretty thing to watch. You know, I was with Putin a lot. I spent a lot of time with him. I got along with him. I got along with President Xi. I got along with Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un has massive nuclear power. It's a good thing to get along with people, not a bad thing. You can be very tough and get along. You know, I'm the one that ended his pipeline. He said, you're killing me with the pipeline. Nobody else ended his pipeline. Biden came in. He approved it. But I did a lot of things that were very tough on Russia. No president was ever as tough on Russia as I was. And I'd come in, the fake news would say, Trump loves Russia. He loves Russia. Then we had the Russia hoax, which is now with Durham and Mueller and all the rest, just a total hoax. It was a made-up, fictional story. But with respect to what's going on now, it would have been so easy for me to stop this travesty from happening. He understood me, and he understood that I didn't play games. This would not have happened. Someday I'll tell you exactly what we talked about. But we talked about it.
Last year, in an interview, Joe bragged about getting Ukraine's general prosecutor fired. He says he was standing up to corruption.
I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko. They would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting $1 billion. I said, you're not getting $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, what, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Oh, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid at the time.
Well, it just so happens that the general prosecutor was investigating an energy firm in which Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, was heavily invested. Burisma Holdings is an energy corporation in Ukraine, and Hunter Biden, the son of the former vice president, has made a rather handsome profit from it, especially in the aftermath of the 2014 events in Ukraine in which pro-EU forces took power. That prosecutor was looking into 3 different instances of foul play from Hunter's cash cow. However, all it took was a phone call from Papa Joe, and that prosecutor was out.
I'm wondering if the State Department has any concerns or any thoughts about the vice president's son joining the board of directors of this Ukrainian gas gas company.
No, he's a private citizen.
So what's President Trump saying about it? Well, he wants Ukraine to investigate whether there's a link between the sacking of Mr. Shokin and Hunter Biden's company.
But what he said is that he wouldn't give, I think it was billions of dollars to Ukraine unless they fired the prosecutor who was looking at his son and his son's company, the company that his son worked with. And that's a very dishonest thing.
Fellow Ukrainian Americans who forged the deep bond that connects our two nations, we stand with you. We stand with you. Putin may circle Kyiv with tanks, but he'll never gain the hearts and souls of the Iranian people. He'll never extinguish their love of freedom.
You're a damn predator. All right, just get the hell out of here.
What are the odds these four people all have children working for Ukrainian gas companies? What are the odds? Probably a coincidence, right? I'm sure that Joe Biden, John Kerry, Mitt Romney, and of course Nancy Pelosi. Interesting, right? What about this? Don't forget CrowdStrike's servers are in Ukraine. You know, those servers, the ones that would have housed election interference evidence in the 2020 presidential election if Trump is correct, which so far he has been, hasn't he? So election interference by a foreign agent recovered by Russia, used to prove their innocence, in the same breath shows absolute proof of rigging. And remember, I'll probably say it more than once, fraud vitiates everything.
По поводу гарантий и что будет, от чего зависеть? Будет ли что-то зависеть от хода переговоров? Наши действия будут зависеть не от хода переговоров, а от безусловного обеспечения безопасности России сегодня и на историческую перспективу. В этой связи мы ясно и четко дали понять, что дальнейшее движение НАТО на восток неприемлемо. Ну чего здесь непонятного? Мы что ли ставим ракеты рядом с границами Соединенных Штатов? Нет. Это же Соединенные Штаты своими ракетами пришли к нашему дому. На пороге нашего дома находятся уже. Ну разве это какое-то избыточное требование? Не ставить больше никаких ударных систем у нашего дома. Ну чего здесь необычного? Вот как американцы бы отнеслись, если мы бы взяли там на границе между Канадой и США или на границе Мексики и США поставили бы наши ракеты. А что, разве у Мексики и у США не было никогда территориальных вопросов? А Калифорния кому принадлежала раньше? А Техас? Вот забыли, что ли? Ну ладно, все затихло. Никто не вспоминает про это, так как вспоминают сегодня про Крым. Замечательно. Но и мы стараемся не вспоминать о том, что как Украина-то складывалась. Кто ее создал-то? Ленин Владимир Ильич, когда создавал Советский Союз. Договор 22 года союзный и 24 год Конституции. Правда, после его смерти, но по его принципам создан. Значит, вопрос в безопасности. Но сейчас, бог с ней с историей, вопрос в обеспечении безопасности. Поэтому нам важен не ход переговоров, нам важен результат. Ну разве мы не знаем? Я же много раз уже об этом сказал. И вы наверняка знаете хорошо. Ни одного дюйма на восток, сказали нам в 90-е годы. Ну и чего? Надули. Просто нагло обманули. 5 волн расширения НАТО. И теперь уже, пожалуйста, в Румынии, сейчас в Польше появляются соответствующие системы. Вот о чем речь. Ну поймите же вы в конце концов. Не мы кому-то угрожаем. Мы что ли пришли туда, к границам США? Или к границам Великобритании? Или куда? К нам пришли. И теперь еще говорят, нет, теперь и Украина будет в НАТО. Значит, и там будут системы. Или, бог с ним, не в НАТО, а на двусторонней основе будут. Базы и ударные системы вооружений. Ну вот о чем идет речь. А вы требуете от меня каких-то гарантий. Вы должны нам дать гарантии. Вы. И немедленно. Сейчас.
I just wanted to get your thoughts on the whole Russia and Ukraine situation.
You know,
here's my first thought is I'm not going nowhere to fight none of these wars for these politicians. I'm staying at home, and when the war comes to Arkansas, I will dig my boots in the ground and I will die for everything I love, and I will not retreat. If this country's invaded and everybody's saying, well, we gotta evacuate, we gotta leave, I will not. I will dig my boots in the Arkansas soil, and I will fight for the people that I love, for the land that I love, and the way of life that I love. But I'm not going overseas to fight. I don't know what's going on, to be honest, brother. I really don't. There's so much stuff, and I don't think nobody knows what's going on fully. There's been so much political corruption in that area. You got Biden and his son making a shit ton of money off of and using our tax dollars to bribe their people. That's treasonous in my opinion. So you got Hunter Biden and his son using our tax dollars. Hey, if Ukrainian government, if you don't do this, we're taking your tax dollars. He shouldn't be giving our tax dollars to that country anyway. We got veterans out here sleeping on the street, and you're going to give our freaking tax dollars to these Ukrainians and all that. Brother, I don't know what's going on over there, but I'm not going over there and fighting, and God bless anybody that's over there that's fighting, and I hope that the shit just gets solved. And man, I don't like war. You know what I mean? I don't want people dying and all that stuff. I don't want to be, but I don't know what's going on. There's so much stuff that I think that's corrupted that we just don't know what's truly going on over there. And I pray all those people are safe.
Yeah, thank you guys. So as someone who comes from the Russian community here in Australia, I've been pretty outraged by the narrative created by our media depicting the Ukraine as the good guy and Russia as the bad guy. Believe it or not, there are a lot of Russians here and around the world that support what Putin is doing in the Ukraine, myself included. Since 2014, the Ukrainian government, together with Nazi groups like the Azov Battalion, have besieged the Russian populations in the Donbass, killing an estimated 13,000 people, according to the United Nations.
That's a lie. That's a lie.
Could I finish?
Just quickly finish, and then we'll come to that and put that to the panel.
So my question is, where was your outpouring of grief and concern for those thousands of mostly Russians?
Okay. Something's been bothering me, I have to admit, since we had Sasha's question earlier about Russia, and it's been playing on my mind. And Sasha, people here have been talking about family who are suffering and people are dying. And I understand you wanted to ask your question about, is there some reasoning for this? But you supported what's happening, hearing that people are dying. And can I just say I'm just not comfortable with you being here. Could you please leave? I've been... It's really... No, Sasha, I'm sorry. You can ask a question. You can ask a question, but we cannot advocate violence. I should have asked you to leave then. It's been playing on my mind, and I'm sorry, but I have to ask you to leave, please.
Okay, could I...
No, please. Just out of respect. Please, we're not having the conversation, Sasha. We can't have people advocating violence. And I should have asked you to leave. It's been playing on my mind. I wanted to have a proper conversation about these things, but I have to ask you to leave. I'm really sorry. Okay, I'm sorry for that. But, these things happen. It's live television. You think about these things. It's really been troubling me that we can have a conversation and we can look at where the arguments are, and we can try to look at the sides of the argument. We can't have that, and I'm sorry.
Okay, good. Put the village behind her.
Give me some flames. How about some screaming?
Screaming's good.
Some sound of screaming.
Okay, we're gonna do it again, sweetie. What's her name? Stacy?
Tracy.
Tracy. One more time, Tracy. You're doing fine. Look at that girl. Doesn't she look Albanian? She looks like she was born and raised in Albania.
Mm-hmm.
Are we ready yet?
How soon do you think we'll be able to get this cut?
Oh, we're going to be done in about 4 or 5 hours.
Oh, that's good. We can link that to the press. They can downlink it on Telstar 401 Transporter 21.
Makes you glad you've lived this long.
And this just in, a Newsbreak special report from the Albanian front. We've just received information that the young Albanian national fleeing in this video is attempting to escape terrorist reprisals in her village. America has seldom witnessed a more poignant picture of the human race than that which armed conflict.
Fantastic.
Great. That was good.
They used the same process with the last Schwarzenegger movie. Fantastic.
7:30 in the morning on the 24th of February. The dialer was my American friend from my high school days in the U.S. He was the last person I expected to call, especially at 7:30 in the morning. I knew immediately that the war has actually broken out. The beginning of the war did not surprise me. In fact, it's long overdue. What surprised me was the fact that he knew nothing about the suffering that the Russian Ukrainians had endured over the past 8 years. Let me get something straight. NATO promised that they wouldn't move an inch to the east. That was a lie. And now we are surrounded by an aggressive military alliance. NATO gladly bombed Yugoslavia under the pretenses of potential genocide. Did they bomb just military installations? No. NATO destroyed schools, hospitals, bridges, cultural monuments, private businesses, and industrial plants. Did you forget about that? Did you forget about how NATO pumped money and weapons into Georgia right before Georgia bombarded Russian peacekeepers and civilians? Of course you did, because your media doesn't want you to know. Did you forget how yet another territory was ripped away from Serbia? Do you not remember Kosovo? Did you protest then? I bet you didn't, and I bet you didn't even care. Did you forget the invasion of Libya? If you're in Europe, you can't forget. Thousands of migrants are your daily reminder of what your governments did to that country. Did you protest the illegal invasion of Syria by Turkey and the US? I bet you didn't. Do you care about Saudi Arabia starving Yemen? I bet you don't. Do you care, or did you care, about the illegal invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan under false pretenses? What, they aren't people to you? Why haven't you been vocal against the murder of children and civilians at Iraqi and Afghani weddings by American bombardment? Ah, that's right. They're brown people. They're probably worth less to you. Where were your crocodile tears when Kiev started bombarding Ukrainian Russians in the east simply for doing the exact same thing as the Ukrainians did in the west, was to get rid of a corrupt government? Where were your crocodile tears when Kiev shut off electricity and water to Crimea? Where was your Save the Ukrainian People when 48 civilian anti-Maidan Ukrainian protesters were rounded into a Union trade house and burned alive, whilst those who tried to escape the fiery hell were beaten and shot? Do you by any chance know who the Madonna of Gorlovka is? Do you know what the Alley of Angels memorial is? Let me give you a hint. People engraved into that memorial aren't alive, and they are not adults. Did you shed even one digital virtue signaling tear when the children at the children's beach in Zagreb were purposefully bombed by the Ukrainian military using illegal cluster bombs? I bet you didn't. But that's okay. How would you? Your mainstream media keeps you in the dark. For 8 years, the US and its allies have been pumping billions of dollars worth of lethal weapons into Ukraine. For 8 years, the Ukrainians have been waging a war with their own people in the east. And for 7 years, Russia and the people of the Donetsk and Lugansk republics have been patiently waiting for Kiev to adhere to the Minsk agreements. Should Russia have waited maybe 20 more years? You know, the amount of years that the US spent killing Afghanis. So whilst leaders like Boris Johnson, Joe Biden, Emmanuel Macron, Olaf Scholz, and Ursula von der Leyen have been virtue signaling about the poor Ukrainians, they have been robbing the Ukrainians of their dignity, making their economy run on loans from the IMF, and basically robbing them of their future. And Russia is to blame when we were their primary trading partner? The West pushed Russia into a corner. Protect yourself from an increasingly hostile neighbor who wants to become part of a hostile military alliance called NATO and lose Nord Stream 2, for example. Or watch Russian Ukrainians get slaughtered by the thousands. The West wanted to fight this war with Russia until the very last Ukrainian. Remember Kosovo? Well, the Lugansk and Donetsk republics have every right to exist. Russia didn't set the precedent. Your leaders did when they recognized Kosovo. And final food for thought. Why was there no bombardment of innocent civilians in Crimea, even though it's closer to Kiev than Donetsk is? I'll give you a hint. The actual Russian military was there protecting the people. Here's another. The Ukrainian army has been fighting this invisible Russian army for 8 years now in the east, according to your mainstream media. Why then did the Ukrainian army collapse within 24 hours when fighting the actual Russian military? And since it did, what do you think your tax dollars were doing in Ukraine? That's right. Your tax dollars were used by Ukrainians in the West to kill Ukrainians in the East, and you didn't give a flying fuck about it. So if you haven't been following this conflict from day one, and now you put the blue and yellow flag on your photo, wipe away your crocodile tears, please, and find out why your governments have been supporting those who have made a Nazi criminal, Stepan Bandera, their national war hero. Don't expect a good result from pushing a bear and the dragon into a corner. And definitely don't be surprised when that bear and that dragon begin pushing back. So if you haven't been crying for the collectively millions of dead Iraqis, Afghanis, Syrians, Libyans, Yugoslavians, and East Ukrainians these past 20 years, but you're crying crocodile tears for Ukrainian military installations, wipe them away and think about what your governments have been doing and what they're still doing. And I hope that this 8-year story of a war started by a criminal Ukrainian government against its own people can finally come to an end.
Центральные каналы берут твои новости?
Нет, конечно нет.
Почему?
Потому что я всегда спрошу мирных жителей, откуда прилет был, кто вас обстреляет. И, конечно, эти каналы, они не хотят говорить, что это украинская армия, которая обстреляет мирных жителей. Они не хотят знать об этом, и они не хотят публиковать об этом.
То есть на центральных европейских каналах есть серьезная цензура?
An ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin, the Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov, says Chechen forces have been deployed to Ukraine.
Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov announced in his Telegram channel a $500,000 reward for each head of Ukrainian nationalist commanders. A reward is being announced for the heads of Ukrainian nationalist commanders, the Bandera, Azov, Dudayev's Shaitan Battalion. I say this not as an official, but as a volunteer on behalf of the patriots of Russia, the same volunteers who have the financial capacity, and who have expressed a desire to pay $500,000 for the head of each commander, Kadyrov wrote.
Soviet reinforcements have arrived.
Trying to figure out what's going on in reality overseas, trusting Twitter, trusting mainstream media, I've reached a simple conclusion. It's basically all lies. I just, every time you try to go down a rabbit hole of literally any headline grabbing piece of news, it seems like at minimum, that's not like the whole story. Okay, which you could probably say is true of a lot of things. But then there's times where it's just outright false. And I've fallen for it. Lots of people have fallen for it. And I made a vow yesterday to try and get better at it. This is the perfect example of how easily empathy poisoned people can be used and manipulated. It happened to me. It happened to me. This man is actually Russian. He's sending his family to Russia while he fights against Ukraine. That guy is the aggressor. Proof? Telegram posts from February 21st and pick 2. You see all these articles. I saw this exact one. Ukrainian father says goodbye to his daughter before sending her away from danger. He is staying behind to fight for Ukraine. There are some who preen and posture about masculinity. They go on and on about male strength and insist on their own power. But when evil comes, they end up siding with the aggressor. And then there's men like this. Except this man, according to his own posts, is in fact Russian and fighting Ukraine.
Okay, here we go.
30 minutes ago by CNN. Watch this.
This is Maiden Square. As you can see, so this is where the revolutionary protests were held in 2014 against the then Yanukovych government. Lots of people around, people getting coffee. There are more soldiers around. There's certain sentry posts around. I spoke to one soldier who confirmed to me that there was an explosion somewhere at an airport, but I was not able to get any confirmation which airport, to what extent. He told me it was tactical. But there's no panic on the streets. I woke up to a very loud alarm in my hotel, but as I scrambled outside, there's not a great deal going on. So this is what it looks like here. I'll keep you all posted. Peace and love to Ukraine.
Ukraine Video is a video game called Arma 3.
Really
I play it.
look at this. That's the footage that you were talking about. Remember that. Now I want you to pay attention to this. Same type of footage, right? Remember the plane? I said, remember the shape of the plane? That's an A-10. Reason why I know, because this is part of a video game that I play called Arma 3. It's a combat simulation. It's exactly what the video is. So I'm sorry, like I said, what you saw was a video game. I've been playing it for years.
The vast majority of the fake news that we see circulating is anti-Russian. So I'll be debunking a lot of this type of information. It was being reported that 13 heroic soldiers on Snake Island were confronted by a Russian warship. The audio recording shows the Russians telling the Ukrainians to lay down their arms to avoid bloodshed and unjustified deaths. The Ukrainians are infamously heard saying, "Russian warship, go F yourself." It was then reported they fought valiantly until they were all killed by the Russians. President Zelensky even announced he would posthumously award the men medals of valor. Well, it turns out whomever claimed they had died was mistaken. Instead, the Ukrainian border guard disputed whether anyone was killed, and shortly after, video footage emerged of the Russians giving food and water to the 82 men, not 13, from Snake Island, who were then being transferred to Crimea. Some of the soldiers have now given interviews saying if the Russians wanted to bury him, they would have, and now they instead will go home to their families. Another shocking video was of a tank swerving in the street and running over a civilian car. Totally shocking video, jaw-dropping. But thank goodness the person actually survived this crushing experience. Media was reporting this as a Russian tank and using it to show the callousness of the Russians and their invasion. But it turns out this was actually a Ukrainian tank that had lost control and accidentally ran over that vehicle. And I'm sure everyone involved was relieved that person was okay. Russian tanks are marked with white Zs, by the way, for future reference when you're looking at any video. Of course, I can't leave out the ghost of Kiev. There's footage of a fighter pilot downing several Russian jets. The video, of course, went viral with millions of views. The claims are this pilot took down 6 Russian jets in one day. But now, by the way, that number's jumped up to 10 Russian jets being taken down. Now, a fighter pilot who takes down 5 planes throughout the course of their entire career is called an ace. So to have 6 in one day or even 10 in 1 week is incredible. It's actually unbelievable, in fact. And it turns out the footage is from a video game called Digital Combat Simulator. But even with this video being debunked, the former Ukrainian president, Poroshenko, is tweeting that it's real and even shared a masked photo of the pilot. And there's a lot of wild claims going around of who the pilot is. There's a lot of talk that maybe the pilot's even a woman. And of course, it turns out that old photo, that photo there is actually an old photo that's recirculated. So it's still unlikely the ghost of Kiev is real. Bild, a political news outlet in Germany, shared a video of what looked to be a horrific bombing by the Russians in Kiev during one of their broadcasts. But it turns out the footage was from a 2015 chemical explosion in Tianjin, China. Newsmax used a photo of a crying older woman standing in front of her devastated home with the caption, "The current devastation in Ukraine." But the photo was from 2015. An Italian news broadcast used footage from the video game War Thunder when talking about the war in Ukraine.
For the rest of us that aren't Ukrainians, I think the world, quite frankly, Kira, is surprised by the will of the Ukrainian people to stand up and fight. Are you?
Well, I'm not surprised. We have been fighting Putin for the last 8 years. But right now, it's a critical time because we know that we not only fight for Ukraine, we fight for this new world order for the democratic countries. We knew that we are the shield for the Europe.
Well, lads, that was a Ukrainian parliamentary member telling everybody, that's right, look at me. The Ukrainian Captain Marvel, everybody. Take it up, arms. I'm going after that pooty poot. And he better watch the fuck out. Because I'm bringing Miss Ukraine 2019 with me. Oh, shit. You're stupid. You're all stupid. You stupid fucking lefties out there buying any of this are fucking stupid. Congratulations on how stupid you are. Of course they're fighting for the NWO. That's why all of the propaganda is on their side. I ain't even talking about the good NWO with the fucking Hollywood Hogans. Dennis Rodman with the worm. No. You guys are fighting for a bunch of globalist kid fuckers. Everybody was on the same page. Everybody, none of this is real. All of these have turned out to be fake. All of them are false. All of them, they're all propaganda. And again, all of the propaganda coming from BBC across the pond, the CBC from the Canadian frozen tundra of tyranny above us, CNN and all the other outlets from this country, they're all 100% pro-Ukrainian. And they're all fucking fake. They're all falling apart. And add this one to the list over here. Nobody should be surprised by this. New York Post. Former myth Grand Ukraine joins the fight against Russian invasion. Take that, Pooty. Take that. She's gonna kill you. She's literally the For Serial's Black Widow. Oh my god. Every single one of these fake fucking stories has been written by some asshole diversity hire trying to get a job at Disney Plus. They're all the same script. They're all horrible, by the way. I'm surprised it wasn't Miss Black Ukrainian, by the way. Right? They're sitting there going, oh my god, Ziz. We need one of those super duper superhero stories for Ukrainians with the black gay trans individual. I don't think there's that many black people in Ukraine. That's because of fucking white supremacy. Anyway, of course, this fell apart, by the way. This fell apart. Here's an election wizard over here. He's telling everybody, debunked. The item Miss Ukraine is holding is a surprise, everybody, airsoft gun. Earlier today, she posted a message on her verified Instagram account stating that she's not a military person, but she does enjoy playing airsoft. And immediately, by the way, George Soros and his limp dick son got on the phone like, boop, 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 boop. You better take that down, bitch, or we'll kill you, we'll arc inside you, we'll send Hillary Clinton to your abode.
About how brave and heroic is Ukrainian to protect our soil, to protect our future, to protect our freedom and our democracy. We are in the center of Kiev. We are here to protect Kiev. And position is about a little bit more than 2 kilometers from here. This is very difficult.
When's the dam gonna bust?
Soon. I can't give you a date. If I had a date, I'd tell you. Yeah. But I can tell you that dam, the cracks are widening, the cracks are widening, the cracks are widening. The head's coming off the snake in the Ukraine.
Oh, yeah.
So you're good.
You've done a fantastic job.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
It's happening.
Well, that's
we just got to keep the pressure on.
Yeah.
Don't back off. That's all we got to do.
Thank you.
Thanks, brother.
You know, the white hats, and this is the biggest military sting in history.
Correct.
I believe that. And we've got to let them hang themselves. We've got to let them commit the crime. It's done. And I'm just hoping we'll see something publicly soon.
You and me and everybody else, we all had a gutful. Good news is we are closer to finishing this than we know.
Yeah, and Trump's Truth Social is up and running in America.
And all of that, yeah.
And all that's
and
coming.
Ukraine is the head of the snake. It's coming off. That's what the Ukraine is really about.
Yeah,
it's not about, you know, You can get technical if you want to. Ukraine doesn't have recognised international borders, which means it's still part of Russia, so Russia's invading Russia, but that's not what it's about.
And he's offered them self-determination, so he's done a Trump on them, and he's just switched things around. He's invaded ISIS, offered them self-determination.
Because the Ukrainian people, just like the Australian people, are blissfully unaware that the people up there are treasonous scum that need to be taken care of. See, the Ukrainians think, oh, this is our country. You've been lied to like everybody else. So the truth has got to come out.
And then we have this historic invasion of Ukraine. What a whirlwind, within the first 4 hours, Putin knocked out the air defense, the Air Force, the Navy, everything. It happened so quickly. And it, of course, is still happening right now as we speak. And when something like this happens, it's the fog of war. We're not all getting reliable information. I've seen some really fake clips, like out of a Hollywood studio, with people dressed up as Ukrainian women with fake bandages on their head and everything. So it's hard to know what is propaganda, what is actually real footage that's coming out. But you put out an analysis, just an overarching kind of model of understanding of why all this is happening, why the war is happening, why Putin's invading. And I'm just going to read it real quick.
Okay.
You said, here's my take on what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. I'm just spitballing here, but like everybody else, I have more questions than I have answers, but I think devolution plays into this. First, think about what Ukraine is. It's the epicenter of corruption for the political establishment. And so you mentioned George Soros, you mentioned the guy from Priva Bank, and that is all funding the deep state agendas worldwide. It's all based out of Ukraine, the Clintons, everything. So if Trump was going to truly drain the swamp, he would have to tackle the corruption in Ukraine. The oligarchs have funded their own militaries in previous color revolutions. Trump wouldn't be able to take them down without a fight. So if Trump is going to clean up Ukraine, he would likely need boots on the ground to do it. Enter Putin. It's no secret that Putin hates Soros, as he banned him from Russia. It would make Trump look weak if it happened under Trump's watch, right? So it all happened under Biden, makes Biden look bad, and kills two birds with one stone, right? So, any final thoughts? I didn't read it word for word. I was paraphrasing you. Anything that I missed? Anything further you want to comment on about how, like, the deep state infrastructure, there are actually facilities and people and so forth in Ukraine that needed cleaned up? What do you think some of those things are?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the corruption in general. The money laundering schemes, all this corruption is based out of Ukraine. I'm sure there's piles of evidence too of all this happening there. But if you don't remove the key players or take out their ability to keep doing these operations, then the corruption is not going to go anywhere. So again, if Trump would have invaded Ukraine to handle this by himself with American troops, that would have been a big no-no. But also, if Putin would have done it under Trump's watch, that would have made Trump look bad. And so it's just that the timing of this, it's almost similar to the economy. I think the economy needed to crash, or it's going to crash. But if it would have happened on Trump's watch, that would not have been good. But instead, we're likely heading towards that happening under Biden. And so it's kind of the same thing. It's not only red pilling a ton of people, this Ukraine situation, but Putin might be taking care of cleaning out the deep state and the corruption in Ukraine. It's fascinating to think about.
What is Putin doing? Is he starting World War III? Did he invade Ukraine? Or is there another mission going on? I do believe there's another mission going on. This is not an invasion. It's a tactical hit. I'm sure they had some intel because we found out a lot of information. We understand there are neo-Nazis within Ukraine. We know there's a bunch of corruption in Ukraine. We know that the Obama administration, along with Biden, Clinton, and the rest, they had regime change in Ukraine. And we have certain individuals in Ukraine that are actually controlling the country, just like the deep state here in the United States or the CCP in China. And we can see that it seems that the go-ahead was given to move into Ukraine to destroy strategic areas let's just go back in time. Remember, and this is coming from Hans Manecki. This is on Twitter. It says, none of this would have happened without Biden and Nuland instigating the 2014 coup, Hillary instigating the Russia collusion hoax, Democrats using Ukraine as a wedge, Biden's getting themselves compromised, media and big tech covering up Biden corruption before the 2020 election. Now, I want to flash back all the way back to 2017 because there was a CNN article all the way back then. It says the following, Corker, Trump setting U.S. on the path to World War III. Was there a World III with Trump? Did Putin invade Ukraine? Did any of this happen? No. When did it happen? On Biden's watch. Don't you find that very interesting? That everything that they said was going to happen to Trump is now happening to Biden. Look at the border crisis. Look at Afghanistan. Look at Ukraine. Remember, they tried to impeach him on Ukraine. But look what's happening with Biden with Ukraine. I do believe this was timed perfectly. The mission here is to get rid of the deep state stronghold. The resident, he is saying that he has been presented with a couple of options which he might take against Russia. And it might be a cyber attack against Russia. So, among the cyber options, U.S. is considering disrupting internet connectivity across Russia, shutting off electric power, tampering with railroad switches to hamper Russia's ability to resupply its forces. Now, think about this for a second. Are they prepping all of this for a communication blackout in the continental U.S.? Because if the United States goes ahead and does this, and I'm talking about the resident, are they going to blame what is happening here in the United States on Russia? I do believe so. But we need to go back in time a little bit. Remember Klaus Schwab? He was predicting a cyber pandemic. So are they prepping for this cyber pandemic? So just take a listen to what Klaus Schwab said.
We all know, but still pay insufficient attention to the frightening scenario of a comprehensive cyber attack, which would bring to a complete halt to the power supply, transportation, hospital services, our society as a whole. The COVID-19 crisis would be seen in this respect as a small disturbance in comparison.
So if you listen to Klaus Schwab, he was letting you know that this cyber pandemic is going to be a lot worse than COVID. COVID will look insignificant. Actually, it was always insignificant. Same thing with the cyber pandemic. The cyber pandemic is already known. Countermeasures are already in place. We already know that Black Eye protects us from a power grid outage. Doesn't mean the local power grid might flicker or go off. And it doesn't mean that the internet might be paused. Actually, we were told it was going to be paused. So this is actually a red line, and it's red too. It's a central communication blackout, continental U.S. I do believe that they're going to end up crossing this. Why? Because the patriots now are going after the deep state players. Remember, this is the offensive now. This is the offensive. Trump, the patriots, and those people that are working with Trump, they're now going on after the deep state. So Russia is saying that Putin will decide when the Ukrainian invasion ends. Now, when will it end? Well, I think he's going to destroy very strategic targets, and he's not looking to hurt citizens or anything like that. They're on a mission. Basically, the Russian Defense Ministry said it was not targeting cities, but using precision weapons, and claimed that there is no threat to civilian population. So they're hitting military targets, and we can see that the neo-Nazis, the deep state players, the swamp creatures, they're very, very nervous about this because they were caught destroying and burning documents near an intelligence building in Kiev. That tells you that they're panicking right now because everything that they created, everything that they put into place back in 2014, 2015 with the regime change is now falling apart. So Putin, he's carrying out a cleanup operation, Trump, I do believe, is working with other leaders. And if you wanted to drain the swamp and destroy the deep state system worldwide, do you work with other leaders? Do the optics have to be right? Think about it. Why would Putin pick this moment? He could have picked any moment. He could have picked the moment during Obama's presidency. He could have said, okay, you know something? You just taken over Ukraine. I'm coming in and I'm resetting everything. Why did he pick now to do it? Did he have a deal with Trump? Is he working in coordination with Trump? I do believe Trump is working in coordination with many different leaders. Putin is not going after civilians. He doesn't want to hurt the people. He's going after the swamp creatures. He's going to denazify the country. Because we know, if we go back to the regime change back in 2014, 2015, we know that it was the Nazis that were used to take over Ukraine, to overthrow an elected leader there, and then put in puppet governments. But let's go to post 1026. This is April 4th, 2018. And it says the following, and Anon on the board says, I bet he already talked to Putin too. Remember this one? Peace through strength. You see, we're going to have peace because Trump, Putin, and many other leaders, they're standing up to the deep state. The strength will allow peace to move forward. Post 1081, this is April 8th, 2018. It says the following. Putin is Russia's president. And this is, by the way, this is an Anon on the board who's saying this. Putin is Russia's president. His job is to look after the Russian people. Put yourself in his shoes. He wants to win. Why not take advantage of his enemies? Trump comes along. Russia, Putin becomes our ally. Xi becomes our ally. Xi and Putin are also under attack by the deep state, which is rooted globally. Underneath it says POTUS never telegraphs his moves. Think logically. Why did POTUS announce his intentions to pull out of Syria? Moves and counter moves. These people are stupid and sick. Well, number one, Trump, he was ending the endless wars. We know that Russia was helping Assad in Syria. We know that the deep state, they were trying to have regime change in Syria. Remember Obama, he was calling the shots, took it away from the military, and was allowing the Islamic State to expand. And I do believe this was going to expand all the way into Russia and disrupt Russia. Assad invited Putin in to get rid of the Islamic State. Trump was elected. He joined in, and they destroyed the Islamic State and everything the deep state tried to do. And we can see that everything is in motion. Remember, this is not about just winning an election. This is not just proving fraud. This is about bringing down the deep state system worldwide.
In this section, I would like to go back in time to remind people of a little-known alliance between the United States and Tsarist Russia. That led to the Russian fleet showing up in force in New York and San Francisco. It arrived at a crucial time in 1863 when Britain and France were on the verge of intervening in the Civil War on the side of the Confederacy. An actual world war was on the horizon that would wrap the world in flames. As Secretary of State William Seward put it, the mighty Russian presence deterred the Anglo-French from invading, and the Union was saved. But let's first go back to 1861, when the Emancipation Edict was passed and successfully carried out by the Tsar Alexander II. That would result in the freeing of over 23 million serfs, or slaves. This was by no means a simple task and met much resistance, requiring an amazing degree of statesmanship to see it through. The success of this edict would go down in history as one of the greatest accomplishments for human freedom. And Tsar Alexander II became known as the Great Liberator, for which he was beloved around the world. Shortly after, in 1863, President Lincoln would pass the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious states are and henceforward shall be free. The autumn of 1862 would mark the first crucial phase of the Civil War. Lincoln sent an urgent letter to the Russian Foreign Minister Gorchakov, informing him that France was ready to intervene militarily. The salvation of the Union thus rested solely on Russia's decision to act. The Foreign Minister Gorchakov wrote in response to Lincoln's plea, "You know that the government of the United States has few friends amongst the powers. England rejoices over what is happening to you. She longs and prays for your overthrow. France is less actively hostile. Her interests would be less affected by the result. But she is not unwilling to see it. She is not your friend. Your situation is getting worse and worse. The chances of preserving the Union are growing more desperate. Can nothing be done to stop this dreadful war? The hope of reunion is growing less and less, and I wish to impress upon your government that the separation, which I fear must come, will be considered by Russia as one of the greatest misfortunes. Russia alone has stood by you from the first and will continue to stand by you. We are very, very anxious that some means should be adopted, that any course should be pursued which will prevent the division which now seems inevitable. One separation will be followed by another. You will break into fragments." Russia's proclaimed support in its letters to Lincoln would be put to the test during the summer of 1863. By then, the South's invasion of the North had failed at Gettysburg, and the violent anti-war New York draft riots also failed, and Britain as a result was thinking of direct military intervention, with the backing of France. What would follow marks one of the greatest displays of support for another country's sovereignty to ever occur in modern history. The Russian Navy arrived on both the east and west coastlines of the United States late September and early October in 1863. The timing was highly coordinated due to intelligence reports of when Britain and France were intending their military action. The Russian Navy would stay along the US coastline in support of the Union for about 7 months. They never intervened in the American Civil War, but rather remained in its waters at the behest of Lincoln in the case of a foreign power's interference. If Russia had not done this, Britain and France would most certainly have intervened on behalf of the Confederate States, as they made clear they would. And the United States would have most certainly broken in two at that point. It was Russia's direct naval support that allowed the United States to remain whole. Russia and the United States of America are natural allies in this deep state war. I believe Putin and Trump are fighting together in the same fight their forefathers fought against the very same enemy. The same enemy we global patriots now face in this information war for the future of humanity. Please share this video with absolutely
everyone. What do you mean everyone?
Это Mr. Pravda Bomba. Von.
I go hard like Vladimir Putin. Go hard like Vladimir Putin. I go hard like Vladimir Putin. Go hard like Vladimir Putin. I go hard like Vladimir Putin. Go hard like Vladimir Putin. I go hard like Vladimir Putin. Go hard like Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin.
Niggas don't know what I put in. Instead, they be out there hating that them boy, them now, them a ranting. Cause I go hard like Vladimir Putin. I'm talking that talk and I'm walking that walk. Nigga got green like Incredible Hulk. You're talking that talk but not walking that walk. Like a Muslim actually eating that pork. Looking at my other mirror. Now it's time to turn up here. Put in work like Vladimir. Yeah, I'm the hottest here.
I go hard like Vladimir Putin. Go hard like Vladimir Putin. I go hard like Vladimir Putin. Go hard like Vladimir Putin. I go hard like Vladimir Putin. Go hard like Vladimir Putin. I go hard like Vladimir Putin. Go hard like Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin. Okay then, let a maniac speak then. These motherfuckers pop plus like CSAM. I see him, I see Sam. I don't wanna take him to 1 ton of Mo Bay. Touch a bitch, nigga, shoulda stayed in your fucking lane. Get money, I'm bossed up. Leave the club, I turn up. Nigga talk shit, get fucked up. Guns in your face, you messed up. I go hard like Vladimir Putin. Go hard like Vladimir Putin. I go hard like Vladimir Putin. Go hard like Vladimir Putin. I go hard like Vladimir Putin. Go hard like Vladimir Putin. I go hard like Vladimir Putin. Go hard like Vladimir Putin. 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 Vladimir Putin.
And click the notification bell for more must-see videos.